And even if I could find it, I couldn't afford it now. And I also knew in my heart of hearts that I was never going to find another Dr. Davidson. And so I ultimately realized that I was going to have to do this myself. And it was just an idea that I toyed with until one evening a certain thing happened to me that really drove home the need for psychiatric assistance. Sarah, my wife, and I were out at a restaurant, a local restaurant. And I had started this book, actually. I had started this story. I had started drawing my parents. I realized that I've realized for years that writing is not my strong point. But drawing is something like falling off a log for me. And I had started drawing my family using the few family photos that I have. But I do have this ability that I've honed over the years to be able to draw, especially people, pretty well, and from any angle I want to. And I had started drawing my mother, and I brought her back, in a way, from the dead. And the minute I saw her on the page again, and saw her expressions, and remembered the way that she was, I felt her presence in my life again, and it wasn't a good thing. And I felt her critical, the eye that I always imagined was trained on me, that was always negative, always on the critical side. And I began to react to it, but of course I started taking it out, not on her because she's dead, but on my wife. And so that if Sarah would say things that, I don't know, anything she said practically ticked me off. I began reading things into her statements. This is a woman I've loved and been married to for, at that point, over 22 years, and have trusted, and was my best friend, and yet I probably would have done this with anybody in the house. And she took it. I think she understood me better than anybody else, but it was hard for her. But I was acting like a 14-year-old again. And it was disturbing and embarrassing on some level. But it just went on and for weeks. And then one night, Sarah and I were at this restaurant, and I felt this lump in my neck started to swell up. And if you've read the book, you know that when I was 14, I had a tumor in my neck from the x-rays that my father had given me as a kid. And it had swollen up to about the size of a small eggplant. And as I sat in the restaurant, that same lump that had taken, when I was a child, 12 years to develop in my neck, developed in my neck in about 12 seconds. And I sat there holding it, and I thought, this has got to be some kind of physical hallucination. And so I looked up and I looked at Sarah's face, which had gone the color of that page. And she said, "Darling, what's wrong?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Here, drink this." And she shoved a glass of wine across the table at me. And I chugged it down, and I said, "I don't know what it is. I just can't stop it." Excuse me a minute. I got up and I went into the men's room because I had to find a mirror to see if this thing was real or not. And there it was, that tumor-like thing in my neck, again. And I realized as I was standing there in the men's room of the Fisher Lake Inn, among the cherry smell of the urinal cakes, that I could die right then and there because my body was expressing the things that I couldn't or wouldn't. And when I realized that, I began to calm down. And within a half an hour, that thing had disappeared completely. And Sarah just reached across and took my wrist, and she said, "Darling, you've got to do that book." And I knew she was right, that I was going to have to face it all, and find out what was killing me emotionally, what was about to kill me physically if I didn't do something about it. So how's that for an impulse to write something?
God, that's an incredible story.
Yeah. Whew. Pretty strange.
Yeah.
Pretty remarkable. I think the body, there's a crazy, wonderful ex-psychoanalyst named Alice Miller who wrote a book called The Drama of the Gifted Child, but she also wrote a book that was very important to me during the writing of this book called The Body Never Lies. And that's her point exactly, is that your body will say what you can't say. If you can't bring yourself to say it, your body will do it for you. And generally it means you die of something. It's an interesting theory. Take it for what it's worth. I think it's right.
So having achieved all this success, almost enough to make people forget all of the other wonderful books that you've done, do you have regrets that you have become kind of an autobiographical graphic novelist, not confessional, because you're not doing anything for attention, you're just reporting as accurately and honestly as you possibly can?
No, I have no regrets about it at all, because so many things have happened around the making of this book that would make me happy that I had made it, even if not one person had bought it. For example, my brother disappeared out of my life when he was about 17. He left the family and went off and eventually got married, and we would see one another off and on, or exchange a phone call if necessary once in a while, but we really couldn't bear talking to one another. And as a matter of fact, about the last serious conversation I had had with him before this book was published, I had told him to, can I use the F-bomb in this audience?
It looks like that's an okay, yes.
Children out. I told him to go fuck himself, that I never wanted to see him again, never wanted to hear from him, wasn't interested in his problems, didn't want to know anything about his family. I wanted him out of my life. And he agreed that that was a good idea. I was into about my 12th version of this book when one day my editor Bob Weil called up from New York, and he said, "David, have you seen the cover of the New York Times today?" And I said, "Bob, I live on a prairie in Michigan. We don't get the Times out here." And he said, "Well, it's online now, David, in case you didn't know. Go read the front page. I'm not even going to tell you what the article is. You'll know, and call me back because I have some difficult questions to ask you." And I did, and I saw the article. It was about a young woman who had published her autobiography about growing up in one of these drive-by shooting kind of neighborhoods in LA, and the drug culture that she was involved in, and the violence that she endured. And when the day that her book was published by Random House or whoever it was, her sister called up the New York Times, or the Washington Post, excuse me, and said, "Not only is my sister's book full of untruths, the whole thing is an unadulterated lie from start to finish. My sister went to the best high school in Los Angeles. We grew up in a beautiful suburb. I don't know why she did it, but anyway, who knows why she did it, but while her publisher was shredding 75,000 copies of her book, and she was going on talk shows crying and apologizing, my editor was quite worried, and rightly so. And he said, "David, I know this has nothing to do with you and your book, of course. I know you're telling the absolute truth, but is there anyone from the past who might remember things a little differently from you and call the Washington Post? Because if there is, we have to know now."